Welcome everybody to Oxfordshire Community Foundation's final webinar of 2021. Just to say we will be back in 2022, although we're probably going to shift to a quarterly array of meetings, hopefully because we will be doing more things in person, but who knows where we will get to on that front. If you could, if you're not already muted, mute yourself and stay muted unless you're invited to speak. If you're able to change your display name to include your organisation's name as well, then that helps us keep tabs on who's attended. And the webinar is being recorded, and we will be making it available on our YouTube channel at a later date so other people can join. The purpose of the session today is more to focus on some informal networking and feedback from the sector more broadly. We've done a bit of a survey, which Kate Parinder is going to present in a minute, and we'd also be very keen to get your reflections and thoughts on that subject matter as well. So I will hand over to Kate Parinder, who is going to talk through some of the findings of the recent work we've done. Over to you, Kate.
Hi, hello everyone. Hi, nice to see you all here. And as Adrian said, today is a bit more informal than usual, but we thought we would just share some feedback that we have had from other groups, and we wanted to get your feedback to add to it really. So I'm just going to share the sort of 2 questions that we asked people, and some of you may have responded to this mini survey. I don't want to call it a survey because it was really just 2 questions, but we asked people about what they needed in this kind of, we called it a post-pandemic period. I know that that's maybe not quite the case, but just so that you know, the full report from the survey is on our website, and we'll send you the link to it after this session by email. So we did ask two really simple questions: how organisations adapted during the pandemic, and secondly, what they need now to thrive. What do they need to going forward into the next year? We had 70 responses to the survey, and just to outline kind of why we did it, apart from obviously it being so important to us to have your feedback, we're also we take a role as a kind of mediator between people who have money and people who want to help the community and fund us and fund you, the groups and the organisations delivering the work, and the networks, charitable networks. So one big reason for running the survey was to get feedback from the sector so that we can talk to funders about those needs. And this is just an extract from the mailing that we did for Giving Tuesday, which was at the end of November, so that we could talk to our key donors and our prospects about what the sector needs, and focus on how philanthropy can or should fill this gap. So that's the role that we see ourselves taking really, is having feedback from the sector so that we can take it to those who have the means to support the communities and the charities that are so important to them. So going on to the questions that we asked, the first one was, what did you do differently in the pandemic that you have or will carry forward? So these are things that people, adaptations that people made that actually perhaps they might see in a positive light, because they've carried on doing them, perhaps out of necessity, but in many cases it's actually sort of improved some of the work that they're doing in quite surprising ways. And it's really notable that nearly half of the respondents said that they transformed the services themselves to meet the need, and some of that is ongoing. That was done out of necessity, so for example to ensure safeguarding or communicate in a different way, but some services have been offered in homes or group settings, usually were being delivered on doorsteps for people. In some cases, specialised paid support has to be brought in where volunteers were previously being mobilised to do things. So a lot of things were changing out of necessity, but this 47% are saying they're keeping those changes. The report has some really good quotes and interesting stuff from people about what those changes were and why they're keeping them. So please do go and have a look at them. In many cases, people have told us that this resulted in an improved service to beneficiaries, either because having to be more personal with them meant they had to kind of develop better relationships with beneficiaries and more kind of individual personal relationships with beneficiaries, or it allowed them to reach more people by being online, for example. So several people told us that their services actually reach more people than ever before. So that's quite interesting, and we're interested in what's changed and what's going to continue to remain in that adapted format. So we'd be really interested to hear your opinion about that. What have you done differently during the pandemic that you're going to keep, and that has been a positive adaptation for you? So that's what we want to do next.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, would each of the groups like to give just a short bit of feedback on what you were discussing in your area?
Happy, I'll do a quick summary. I think the basic thing was that everybody adapted really quickly to changing circumstances and moving on to digital. And Anya was telling us about putting her dance classes and her tour online, which sounded like it was very inventive and very effective, working in collaboration with all sorts of different people. And I think that was the biggest thing. We also talked to Stuart, who represents a funding organisation, and they changed their criteria for funding, much like OCF did. Getting money out quickly into the community was our priority at the start. And just using digital settings. And we were joking, actually, that we've all learned how to use Teams and Zoom, but not always as well as we might think we can. Various technical problems today. But yeah, it was just a general talk about adapting to the situation.
Great. Thank you.
Again, you know, we sort of quickly talked about that move to online, and what an important resource it had been, and how it had enabled us to connect with people that we hadn't had a chance to connect with before, and maybe wouldn't even get the chance to connect with in normal times. Talked about how it potentially had enabled us as organisations to be broader geographically and include more of the county, that we saw sort of, even though some of the calls and some of the training isn't as diverse as we still want it to be, in geographic terms across Oxfordshire, I think there's been some strides forward in that. Everybody felt. And then we were just moving on to talking about some of the challenges that had evolved, though, and predominantly the fact that kind of directories of services and databases of services that were always difficult to keep up to date anyway, now felt wildly out of date, and that it was really hard to keep track of what had survived or what was ebbing and flowing with different restrictions. And as quickly as you could perhaps set something up that met restrictions, by the time you were actually then launching it, there might be a change. And you had to pull back from it. So then we were just kind of evolving into a conversation really about those challenges, and that, you know, partly it's about some services and activities not returning to full strength because people don't have the confidence to come out and do those sessions, and also the challenge of some sessions not coming back because they were run by volunteers who don't have the confidence to be able to come back and run those sessions.
Thank you, Laura. And I was in the fourth group, or the third group, sorry, room 4. Similar issues. I mean, we focused mostly on the online world and some of the upsides of it. You know, it is or can be much more efficient to bring people together, like sessions today, or if you're meeting with someone who's a long way away from you, you can do so very, very quickly and easily. So it can be a good way of building up new contacts and new networks. But it does lose something. It takes away, I mean, it's much harder if you don't know people. So building new relationships. We had a mentor in the room who was saying it takes longer online to do so. And you miss the tangibility. I know pre-pandemic OCF used to do seeing is believing visits, where people could go out and visit and see work in you know, as it was being carried out, and get a real sense of what was going on, and, you know, physical, tangible feeling for it. And obviously you can't do that in what is basically a two-dimensional world. We then started going into the kind of second question a little bit in terms of the support that's needed, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute.
I'm just going to share a slide about the question that we asked and what we want people to discuss next, and the feedback we've already received in our mini survey. Is that okay? Yep,
that's great.
Okay. So this is back to what we asked people in our mini survey. The second question we asked, so the first question we asked was a free text answer. So there's some of the report that I was talking about earlier summarizes those free text answers. This was a multiple choice question about what support organizations need as a result of these new ways of working. I think the funding question is absolutely overwhelming in the responses, and it's not really a surprise. So whilst people have succeeded in adapting to an online world and made some of those changes, they still need investment in IT capability, technology, and financial investment in their core capacity. So that is core costs funding came across so strongly in the feedback. We picked that out, the core costs answers, 64%, but actually 74% of the answers talked about funding of some kind that was needed. So the other part of that must be project funding. And out 43% only selected funding out of all the options. It was a multi-select thing that you could choose lots of different options, and nearly half of people just said they need funding. So that came across really, really loud and clear in the results of our survey. And one key point made in the comments that we have shared with our donors as part of that mailing was that core funding increases organisational resilience and allows the space and security we need to be innovative and forward thinking. And I just thought that was so well put by that respondent to the survey. I think we should give Agnes Smith Advice Centre credit for that one. But it was really clear that organisations in the charity sector are asking us to place their trust in them and give them core cost funding. So I will move on and stop sharing, and we're going to ask you that same question in the breakouts to discuss and see whether you agree.
Back, everyone. I think we're losing about one person every time we shift between breakout groups and the main group, but that's not entirely surprising. Right, shall we get some feedback?
Okay, I'll go ahead. So we talked about needing HR support, particularly around employees' changes to their working conditions, because they're now working more at home or remotely, and we need to have more confidence around flexing terms and conditions. Core funding is still a huge need in the sector, and emergency funding was very valuable during the pandemic and allowed organisations to carry on. So that support is still needed in terms of core funding. Talked again about online working and how it feels very different. Collaboration has been great, but it takes time when you're also delivering your charity's work at the same time. But people want to continue with that, but with an element of informal networking as well. So trying to get that balance right, I think, is going to be the challenge going forward, and supporting each other through changing times. And that's pretty much a summary of everything that we talked about.
Thank you, Annette.
We basically had a bit very much about core costs, and in respect for Restore, it was very much to do with that they have a waiting list, and so it's partly core costs to be spent on staff and more facilitators, and a bit of training around that. And then I think we also did talk about technology and training from sort of two sides. I think that there's the training within organisations. So Laura's mentioning that not many organisations, some feel short of technology, but more actually the ability to use it properly is more the challenge. But then also it's very much looking at dementia people as well, that they don't necessarily have enough computer technology to send out to people, and then the end user would then obviously need training about how to use it as well. So that's a two-sided thing of training the beneficiaries in how to use it and getting it. We talked briefly about sort of getting Oxfordshire online and other things about how we can get that, whether we can get that technology out to people. And we also talked a little bit about the sort of the training that there is an awful lot of stuff out there that we don't necessarily, the answer is not necessarily to start writing things about how to use any computer programs, because you can look at you can look at almost anything on YouTube apart from anything else, that there are thousands of videos and guides about how to do whatever. I think you probably learn how to do open heart surgery if you go on YouTube, really. But there is just, and Microsoft and everybody else put out various things, so it's trying to collate all of that and make it available to the right people.
Thank you. Well, unsurprisingly, we had some similar conversations. I'm going to post a link in the chat box, which is Getting Oxfordshire Online, who have done a map of the county and kind of training and support that is available for people wanting to get online and use various tools online more effectively. Also mentioned Oxford Brookes do the driving license, computing driving license course, which is a good kind of foundational course in all aspects of using computers. Other things we talked about in our group, and we've come up with the name for the workshop to help people in online meetings, and it's taking the fear out of Zoom. So I don't know who wants to run that in the new year, maybe OCVA, but we've got the title for you. We also talked about office space. A lot of organisations now are moving to blended ways of working when we're not locked down. Or working from home, and so thinking about ways of sharing space, bringing charities together, which could also help collaboration and with sharing of back office functions and so forth, and Make Space, a local community interest company, doing a lot of work there with the council around meanwhile space and use of other office space that can be quite creative and quite engaging. And we also talked about the importance of core funding and making the case to donors. He says, speaking as a donor, for more core funding for charities. I think it's something that we all want to do. It's just how we make the case for it, how we do it, and how we demonstrate it. It does deliver value for money and the impact that we want to see with the funding we've got. So those are the things we talked about in our groups. Any thoughts or reflections or comments anyone wants to add to any of that?
I try to draw some conclusions from the feedback we've already received, and it would be interesting to hear if people sort of agree with that.
Go for it.
Concluding comments. So these are the concluding comments from the report that we published from our mini survey. Digital not being the answer every time. I think we've touched on that in the discussion, that there's nothing like the chemistry that you can build by seeing people face to face. The second point is really important. Charities are professional and knowledgeable, and I think everything that you said about adapting quickly and innovatively during the pandemic, we really want to get across to everybody that the charity sector is a really credible, competent, brilliant, adaptable, professional sector, especially in Oxfordshire, and one that can be trusted to know what it's doing in terms of delivery. But that there are still needs, and we've heard a lot about actually some of the ongoing training needs, but the needs that your organisations and charitable organisations are addressing are persisting, and particularly because of the economic fallout of the pandemic. And therefore, charities need investment in their resilience and in their core kind of capability, and that charities need support to work together. And we just heard that back, I think, from Annette's group, that collaboration is considered beneficial but difficult and time consuming, and so you need support to help you do that. So I think we're not going to go into breakouts again, but it'll just be interesting to hear if those summary comments kind of reflect your feelings and thoughts.
I think the one about collaboration we touched on with the first question, and I only came into my post a year ago, but I think the size of many organisations and the scale of what they need to achieve to deliver on their outcomes just means that we can only really meaningfully achieve things by working together, and that has really come across this year. And I think that I'm sure that people were having those conversations and talking about the strength of collaboration before COVID, but I think that needing to respond to something rapidly and find quick solutions and be able to make things happen for people that need it just meant that people got to experience those really quick wins of collaboration. And I think that a lot of the time you can only develop a meaningful partnership with somebody once you've had that tangible thing to work on together and had that sensation of seeing the result of what you've been able to achieve together for somebody or something. And so I think that's something that's been accelerated over that period, and that I hope that we can retain it, because you don't want collaborations just be about a funding push or a funding cut or something like that. It's about trying to drive that positive bounce and sensation of knowing that when you bring your skills together, you can achieve something quickly. And even just on that level of sharing documents, hearing people talk about HR, the number of organisations that I've spoken to in trying to work out what our hybrid working policy was going to be, and just feeling comfortable in knowing that other people are going to be having those thoughts as well, because you've heard people talking about it in these forums. So knowing that you can, message a colleague in a different organisation and say, have you done a policy? What kind of barriers were there with staff? Can I start with your draft and do something with that? It's even little things like that, I think, that add to that kind of positive sense of working together and sharing best practice.
Thank you, Laura. And I think the back office function sharing and sharing of that resource and expertise and knowledge, I'm sure there's something there that we've talked about a bit, which would be really great to explore next year. And I think on the collaboration, I think everybody in the voluntary sector I know wants to collaborate, and it's the time and capacity to have the conversations and build the relationships. So I think there's probably a link with core funding there, actually, that if we are slightly better resourced organisationally, then we are in a better place to make those links and build those collaborations and partnerships that we all want to see. Any other comments or contributions?
I think that just the digital is not always the answer. Moira mentioned in our last breakout group, particularly concerned about the older population, and that face-to-face contact and it is not replaced by a Zoom call or this or so. Yes, I don't know. We need to think very hard about how we can work around those kind of things about what where digital isn't the answer.
Absolutely, and I think that came out very clearly in the report as well, and on the final slide that Kate highlighted. Neil.
Yeah, I just want to go back to Laura's comments, which are so appropriate. The fact that people were encouraged and forced to collaborate and found out not only did they enjoy it, but it was worthwhile. I just wondered, do we have any numbers on how many charities we've lost in Oxfordshire this year and how many new ones are being formed? We don't seem to measure nationally the churn in the sector. The figures I see constantly, we got about 166,000 charities. I think the last Oxfordshire figure I saw was 2,600, but I'm not sure whether that probably includes community centres and schools as well. But do we have any feel for the sector we're trying to work in and service, please?
It's a tricky question. Simon could talk at length about this, because even counting the number of charities, when you start including private schools, and almost all of the colleges have got their own charitable arms. There's people like Oxfam, obviously, just around the corner from where I'm standing now. So I think one of the things we'd very much like to do is get a better handle on and get better information sharing, community groups, frontline community groups. Who are they? Where are they in Oxfordshire? And kind of build from there a better picture of what we mean when we're talking about the local voluntary community sector, because it's a small subsector of charities in the county.
I think those community groups, I think that's one of the most distinctive things, isn't it, that across this last year or so, those informal community groups have just become more and more visible. So I think they may well have been there before, but they are very much more visible. But I think the other thing which is much more visible is the level of need. And so I think a lot of us are going to be using either the same number of staff or possibly even a smaller number, trying to reach a larger and larger range and level of needs. And that really is a challenge. That really, so I mean, that drives the collaboration and thinking much more systemically together, which is obviously the long-term way to go. But there is an immediate challenge because of the levels of need and inequality and everything that we know about the big system now. And if we are have been known as organisations prior to this as being hands-on, practical, you can go there and they'll help you physically and practically with this. It's really, really difficult to maintain that level of really practical one-to-one, face-to-face input with need just both rising fast, but also much more visible at the same time. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges as a sector, actually, is how we bring those two things together without going fully digital.
Thank you, Helen. And I mean, it reminds me that 21 months ago, I started as a volunteer with Oxford Together as a street champion, putting together a WhatsApp group. And there are WhatsApp groups across the county that have been actively supported. And those are organisational. There's an organisation there, but there's not a legal registration. There's often an organisation behind it helping coordinate and fuel with the information and so forth. But I think that kind of breaking down the barriers between what's an organisation and what's local community, and finding ways of enabling local communities to support people in their midst, and then providing additional support where that's needed is probably got to be the way to go. But that is probably at this point in the year one for 2022. I just want to say thank you everyone for making the time this afternoon. We will be back in 2022. As I said at the start, we are thinking we're going to go quarterly. That was before we thought we might be going back into lockdown in January, so we will keep that under review. And if we are locked down, we will probably continue doing these monthly. But on the assumption that Omicron does pass through and we come out the other side in reasonably good shape next year, we will see you at some point in the first quarter. In the meantime, I hope everyone gets a bit of time and space and a break and time to be with family and friends in the coming month or so. And thank you all for making the time today, and look forward to seeing you next year.